business tips to successfully start and run your business so your business doesn't run you. And more importantly, we provide personal development tools to create a better version of yourself to provide the solid foundation for your life and business to stand upon. This is the Biz Reveal, and I'm your host, Craig Sawyer. This week's episode is sponsored by Sawyer Health Solutions. Protecting what's important to you is what's important to us. Get your free health insurance quote at SawyerHealthSolutions.com. Using a blend of humor and insight, Claire Chandler pulls leaders out of their silos and extracts the fundamental DNA that makes their businesses unique. Claire's simple yet powerful process helps businesses find and fix bottlenecks that are choking their business performance so they can rapidly scale without the growing pains. After the show, learn more at www.clairechandler.com. This is the Biz Reveal podcast with this week's guest, Claire Chandler.
I am a corporate survivor, so I spent the earlier part of my career in corporate roles. After, by the way, swearing I would never work in corporate, but that's where the opportunities were back when I first started. I left corporate in 2011, really to pursue more work that I was truly passionate about, which was really to help companies and individuals find deeper fulfillment in the jobs and the businesses that they were in. And so I formed my company officially in 2013. My company is called Talent Boost, and I specialize in leadership acceleration. So really helping companies find and place and accelerate the performance of the right leaders in the right roles.
I love that too, because I talk, obviously the podcast is about, helping entrepreneurs and business owners and all that stuff and how to run your business, how to market your business and different things like that. But it all starts if you have employees, right? Because not all businesses do. If you have employees, it all starts there. Like you can't do any of the other stuff without them because typically they're going to be the ones doing it. So finding the right people is the hardest part, and then keeping the right people is probably as hard, if not harder. So I appreciate there's people like you out there that actually can help folks like us who are, maybe looking for people like that. So what actually got you into this? Like, I know you said that you were in the corporate world and all that stuff, as was I, and I feel your pain, sister.
Right.
If you had to deal with it, because there's so much political stuff you got to deal with and just agreeing when you don't agree and things like that. So that's why a lot of entrepreneurs are like, no, man, I want to do my own thing. But why this niche? What made you decide to do this part of it?
Yeah, great question. And just to quickly kind of respond to what you just said, I think that, the biggest thing that us entrepreneurs run screaming into the night away from in a corporate structure is that layer of political BS and bureaucracy that just sort of clogs up my ability to bring my best self forward, right? My ability to just sort of play in my genius zone. And I think that's what entrepreneurship is really all about, is finding that genius zone and putting yourself in the path of people who can most benefit from that. And so for me, when I, was in corporate, and I would not trade the years I spent in corporate.
Sure. There's a lot to be learned.
There's totally a lot to be learned. There are a lot of best practices. And then of course there's, what not to do, right? The things that when you build your own thing, when you build the world that you want to play full out in, you can look back on that structure. You can look back on that foundation and you can say, let me take the best of what that experience gave me and let me make sure that I don't replicate, the things that I just didn't, that just didn't resonate with me. And so though throughout my corporate career, I had a variety of roles. I was in communications. I did a lot of kind of marketing and promotion. I spent a few years in our customer service department and headed up customer relations, which was such a great experience. And then I found my way, as I always say, into HR through the side door, because they were looking for someone to head up their employee development area. And it was an interest of mine. I am the product of a school teacher. My mom was a school teacher before she retired. And so that sort of educating others and helping them find those breakthroughs in the knowledge and the experience that they didn't even know that they had was sort of in my blood. And so when I got to that turn in my corporate tenure to work in HR, it really tapped into my passion, which was to help elevate the game, the performance, and the engagement, the fulfillment, the feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment of employees at all levels. In terms of what they were doing. And so when I decided to go out on my own, and I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to this, there were so many things you can do, right? So it was sort of like, I knew I wanted to do something other than continue to go on the corporate hamster wheel, but I wasn't quite sure what that niche was going to be. And so, when I first was leaving corporate America and people were like, have you thought this through? Is this really a smart decision? You have this steady job and you're on an executive track and, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm going to figure it out. Right. And I had this laundry list of things that I had experience doing. But it was through a lot of, I don't even want to say trial and error, but it was through a lot of experimentation, right? We entrepreneurs experiment a lot and we pivot all the time and we're constantly evolving until we figure out, yes, what drives the most business value for us, but also what makes us happiest, right? What makes us most fulfilled? What makes us feel most like productive members of society? And so for me, it was narrowed down from that employee development niche to really working with leaders at the highest levels of an organization that I can, because culture sort of trickles downhill, right? The biggest impact on a company's culture, big or small, is the behavior of its leaders. It's not those employees at the ground level, although they are such a critical component of the engine that runs your business, that grows your business. But they're observing what gets rewarded, what gets replicated, what gets advanced. And so if your leaders from the top of the organization are not dialed into your mission, are not dialed into your message, and are not promoting a productive, positive culture, you're going to lose those employees who, to your point, are the ones who get that work done.
Right. Yeah. And well, everybody, I mean, you can use all kinds of cliches for that, right? But it always starts at the top. And the whole point is to have the people who are towards the bottom of the ladder, who are trying to get up the ladder, to emulate the people who are at the top of the ladder, right? Because that's probably how they got to the top of the ladder. But there are always people that fall through the cracks and, they don't always go through the steps, or they feel like their egos maybe got a little bit too big once they got to the top of the ladder, or even the middle of the ladder. Sometimes the middle of the ladder is where you have some of the biggest problems with egos, because they just haven't learned their lessons yet to get to the rest of the way up the ladder. So those folks are going to emulate the people that they want to be. So if the people that they want to be are not who they should be, it's all going to trickle down and spill over. So how do you determine when you are, and actually let me ask you one question first, because I want to make sure that I'm staying on base with what you specialize in. Do you specialize in getting and staffing folks at all levels of a business, at the top level, the bottom level? Where's your specialty at as far as the types of people that you're helping businesses obtain?
Yeah. So the short answer is it's employees at all levels, but I do start by working with the top. So while I've done recruiting in the past, I don't, directly get involved in recruiting anymore. What I do get involved in, though, is helping companies, the larger ones, ideally, because they tend to have more bureaucracy that sort of has crept in over the years, and there's more of an opportunity to effect systemic change, right? But I help those leaders, particularly operational leaders, because I do feel like they have the biggest impact on the bottom line, the ability to grow, the ability to sustain, and all of that. But I tend to work from the highest levels on down, to really help those leaders become crystal clear on what their mission is. And mission is sort of tossed around as this throwaway word. Yeah, of course we have a mission statement. It's on one of these walls. Where did we hang that mission statement, right? And it becomes the office joke because everyone walks past that nice mission statement that, by the way, if it's still in a brass frame, it's really, really old. So you might want to revisit
it. So the first
right?
tip is get rid of the brass frame.
Yeah, you might want to kind of just even update the look, right?
Right.
And I laugh because there's so many businesses I'll walk into and they'll have their mission statement printed up and the pages are yellowing and it's and anytime an employee walks past it, if they even notice it anymore at all, they chuckle because they're like, yeah, that does not reflect reality, right? But when I say mission, I don't mean mission statement. I mean truly purpose, right? What are you in business to accomplish? And when I work with leaders one-on-one, it's an even more pointed question. It's what are you specifically in that leadership role to fulfill? Because a company of any size does not have the luxury of just putting a whole bunch of leaders, in play without having some sort of intention for why they exist, right? And people they lose sight of that. They lose sight of why they are put in that role to begin with. So I help individual leaders, groups of leaders, and companies to create a system for identifying and deploying leaders in the right way, which of course then ultimately trickles down to who and how do we add to the team, right, to better contribute to the mission.
That is exactly what my first question was going to be is how do you determine the ideal candidate for a company? What is the methods that are used to, because you can't find the right candidate unless you know who that right candidate is or what type of attributes or education or experience or, whatever the case is. How do you determine who the right person is going to be that you want to go out and look for?
So I applaud you because you were literally the first podcast host to ask me that question using the right word, which was the right candidate, not the best candidate. And I think companies often confuse the two, right? They will say, go out and find me a rock star. Go out and find me somebody who has absolutely crushed it in their past roles. And while past performance should give you some indication of potential future results, a rock star in one company could be an absolute train wreck in yours. And so it's really important to understand and appreciate the difference between finding the best candidate available and the right candidate.
Because that could be a difference in cultures of different companies. It can be
a complete, and 100%. And again, culture is one of those words that tends to be a throwaway as well for leaders who don't quite get it. Culture is what helps your business to survive and thrive. It's not having the best widget out on the market. It's having the culture that fuels that engine behind the scenes. So your employees give that discretionary effort. They come up with innovative ideas. They have a safety mindset, right? Even in an office setting. And when I say safety mindset, I don't just mean, let's make sure the hazardous materials are properly stored in our office, right? It's about having this sort of protective mindset for yourself and the people around you, not self-preservation, but how do we and how do I as an individual contribute to making this culture the most positive it can, the most conducive to the best ideas, the best work, the best talents, and all of that. So culture is not a throwaway word. It is the bedrock on which you build the right team to go after the right mission.
I agree. And I love that you think of them the same way as me, the mission statements and the cultures. It has gotten throwaway and there needs to be a new focus put on it. In fact, I think it's perfectly fine. And, this is my opinion. I think it's perfectly fine for a company to change their mission statement. The world around us changes. So your focus as a company probably should change as well over time. Now, I'm not saying you should change your mission statement every year because then it's kind of like a lack of identity. Who are you really if you're changing it that often? But, maybe once a decade, you should be looking, at your mission, who your focus is on, because the world around just changes. So who your customer is today, 10 years from now, maybe a completely different type of person or industry or whatever the case is. So I think it's okay for the mission statement to change. Culture, I don't know if I feel that way because you want a certain type of feeling in your office If you're the type of company that wants, hey, I want all of our employees to feel important. I want to make sure that we have that open door, quote unquote. I know that's used a lot too, but that open door policy where our employees can feel like they can offer suggestions on how we can operate more smoothly or more effectively or better customer service and things like that. I don't really necessarily think that that's something that should change. I think culture should be pretty permanent. But mission statements, I don't know. I think that they can evolve.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I agree with you. I think cultures tend to evolve glacially. So at a very slow pace, because you can't manufacture culture, right? To your point about a mission, and what better time than the year we are just kind of completing,
No kidding, right?
this year of COVID. Remember when it was going to be a 2-week blip? And if we all just got together and just like locked ourselves down for 2 weeks, and that just seemed unfathomable.
Right.
And gosh, we wish we had those 2 weeks back, right? Because we would go, no, okay, I take it seriously this time. I'll go back and do it, right? But anyway, this whole year, if ever there was an opportunity to do a hard reset of your business and reevaluate, are we still pursuing the right mission, right? Because to your point, customer needs change a lot. They have changed dramatically over the last year, regardless of what industry you're in. The mechanism by which we get that product or service to our client or our customer has changed. We're much less hands-on out of necessity, even if we've got essential workers, even if we still have people that are, boots on the ground. Just the way we look at our companies has changed. So I think, to your point, if you were waiting for an opportunity to take that brass-plated, dust-covered mission statement off the wall and take a fresh look at it, in walked COVID. And I think it's the perfect opportunity to revisit that and to do a hard reset and to say, should we plant our flag somewhere else? Should we aim our ship in a different direction? Because we can change that point in the horizon that we're aiming for relatively easily. But the culture that it takes to get there, to your point, I 100% agree. It's going to change very, very slowly. And it's not something that you can just decide our culture is going to be about this today, and it was about that yesterday.
Right.
You can say that about mission, but culture has to follow along, and it has to be built off the behavior of its leaders.
And like I said, you can't train cultures. People belong or don't belong, and you have to know the right questions to ask when you're interviewing and things like that to find out if they are, get down to the personality of that person and what they believe in. Yeah. Speaking of which, avenues in which you find people to bring into a company, what are the best avenues to take to look for quality people that might be a good fit for your business? And I know that that's a little vague because we don't know what type of business. We're talking about all businesses right now, but what are some good avenues to go to look for folks?
So to me, there's a lot of, and I don't mean to equate this to a funnel, but we all know the concept of a funnel that you want to, put in as many opportunities and avenues for the right candidates or opportunities or what have you at the top, and then filter down to who are the right people, right? And I mean, we could sit here and talk about job boards and, ways to use LinkedIn and Facebook and, Craigslist and eBay more effectively. Probably not eBay. We're probably not auctioning people yet.
Not yet.
Candidates, not yet. But, hey, we're moving toward a gig economy. So I think that day is coming. But I think, the first thing, to your point, every company is different. Every size is different. Every industry is different. Every need is different. But the first thing you have to ask yourself as a company is, how well known am I in the marketplace? Because, I'll say a SpaceX has a different cachet in the market than Joe's Bike Shop, who, is just as interested in promoting a very positive culture and getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, but may have a very different starting point, right? Most everybody has heard of SpaceX by now. Everybody on the planet, pretty much, or at least everybody in the US, has heard of Amazon. So Amazon has a very different starting point in terms of looking for talent. They don't have the bottlenecks, the restrictions that other companies do in terms of trying to get the attention of as many candidates as possible. So let me speak to those smaller companies, those lesser known companies first, because you have to hit it from multiple avenues. And it is tricky because the smaller the company, the fewer the resources that you have to dedicate to this, right? So the first thing for me is, again, it's clarity of the mission. So really understanding where it is that you're going as a company, why you're in business in the first place, what it is you are trying to accomplish, and how you'll recognize success when you get there. And then for me, it's really identifying, okay, if that's our point B, what are the mission critical skills and attributes and abilities and experiences that we need to have in order to achieve that mission, right? So there's a little bit of an inventory gathering, just around, if that's our, and I'll go back to SpaceX, if that's our mission to Mars, right? We need to land on Mars. What do we need to do to get there? And yes, we need the right rocket ship and all of that. But in terms of capabilities in our team to achieve that mission, what's that laundry list of mission critical items? And then once you have that, then you can start to determine, and you can do this with a company of any size, even if you're a solopreneur hiring that first person. You can say, okay, if this is my laundry list of mission critical, I have to have these attributes, these skills, these abilities. What do we possess now? What are we already strong in, and where are our gaps? Because now okay, I have to start hiring for that. The next person I hire, the first person I hire, has to help complement a gap that I have. Because what good does it do you if you've got, let's say 5 mission critical attributes and you're already strong in 3 of them, to just keep hiring for those 3? You want to hire for the other 2. So I haven't even gotten to, right, how do you identify the right candidate yet? Because there's some homework that we've got to do, this pre-work, before you even face the outside market. But now that you have that, you're in a much stronger position to say, this is who we are. Hello, for the first time for some of us, right? This is what we stand for, and this is where we're going. If you want to be part of that journey, let's make it as easy as possible for us to find each other. And there are ways to do that mechanically, right? There's job boards, there's aggregates, there's third-party recruiters, there's, a really dynamic website, there's Facebook ads, there's all of these sorts of things to help get you the biggest megaphone you can. But then ultimately, it's what can we do to attract, bring in, capture and retain the right people to complement our gaps and to help us fulfill our mission.
So the first step, and I love how you presented that, because the first step is basically finding your identity as a company, and then you have to identify what your needs are. And when you pointed out the gap thing, I love that, because I've used the example before with business owners. If you have a partners should always be pretty opposite of each other, right? You have your analytical guy, you got your creative guy, right? But you don't want them both to be analytical. You don't want them both to be creative, because if they're both creative, you're probably not handling the financial part, right? Right. Because everybody's dreaming. But without the dreamer, the financial guy or the analytical guy isn't going to come up with all those cool ideas. He's the person that's just going to make sure that it's logistically capable of doing that. So filling in gaps. I love that you said that you're not looking for a generalized, okay, we need this role, let's hire for that role.
Exactly.
You may need to hire for that role, but what type of people do you already have in that role, and what's missing? What do we adding personality? Like I call it business personality, but adding a personality to the business, because the more differences you have in people, same skills, right? They're doing the same job, same skills, but different people are going to come up with different things. So I like that you use that filling the gap phrase.
And they have to mesh with each other, right? I mean, it does no good, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, where you've got a small company's two partners, very different, because one's a dreamer, one's a doer, and they end up splitting up because they hate each other, right? So there's absolutely value, and it's critical that you find people who complement each other in terms of complementary skills and perspectives and attitudes and all of that. But at the end of the day, they also need to be able to get along constructively, even when they disagree, so that you can move your company forward. And they don't have this sort of, you said you've worked in corporate as well. There were so many people who work in corporate jobs, and I found myself there toward the end as well, where the closer I got to my office, the more my stomach started to churn.
When you're self-employed, whether as an independent contractor or a business owner, when it comes to health insurance, you're on your own. Health insurance for the self-employed individual is imperative. When you get sick or injured, you aren't working and you don't get sick days. You may end up facing staggering medical expenses and loss of income. Health risks and uncertainties are a part of life. You can't always plan when you get sick, but you can be prepared for the financial aspect. The best way to be prepared against uncertain health risks is with the right health insurance plan. Call Sawyer Health Solutions today for your free consultation and quote. Allow us to put a plan together that makes sense for your situation. Call 239-677-9877 or go to our website at sawyerhealthsolutions.com. Protecting what's important to you is what's important to us.
And how many people do you know who are still in corporate jobs who feel that way? And it's probably more than not, right? And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. And no founder, no C-suite executive actually wants that in their people. And they just don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, I agree. And because if you don't have that right attitude where, I know people laugh when they hear this, but are you excited to go to work every day? And, some of us are, right? Some of us are like, heck yeah, man, another day. I love this. Yeah. And I know there's probably some people listening to this and like, that guy's nuts, right? But some people are like that. Most of us go to work every day, especially if you're in the corporate world, because we know at the end of the week or every other week, we get a paycheck. Right? There's not too many of us that if we had money flowing out of our ears, we'd be going to work every day. There are some crazy nuts, but
jobs.
Right. What the hell's wrong with those people? But most of us go to work because we need a paycheck, but you are there. You're at your job more often than you're with your own family. So if you can't be happy and not content's not good enough. If you can't be happy while you're there, you are doing yourself a great disservice, and eventually it's going to do the company a disservice as well, because it spills over, whether you think it does or not, or no matter how hard you try to hide how much you hate your job or how mundane it is or whatever, it does spill over.
You're going to, if you're not excited about your job or at least happy in your job, you're not going to bring your best self. You're not going to bring your best ideas. You're not going to walk in with this sense of wonder and curiosity. So many people that I know, and it's not just in corporate, I don't mean to pick on corporate, but it's such an easy target, right? But so many people go, kind of have that sort of, oh my gosh, it's Sunday night. I know I'm not going to sleep tonight because my stomach's churning about what I'm facing on Monday morning.
Exactly.
And they greet Monday morning with, what do I have to do today? Versus, what do I get to do today?
Right.
What do I get to experience? Where do I get to contribute? What do I get to achieve? And if you're not approaching your role and your business from the top on down with that sense of wonder and that sense of, I get to go to this job where my best talents and the things that fuel me are sort of opened up and invited, then you're doing it wrong. And you might be in the wrong place, or you might be in the wrong role, or you just might have the wrong mindset. Because so many people think, well, it's your job. You're not supposed to like your job. How many people do you know who've actually said that? I know lots of people who say it's your job. That's why it's called work. You're not supposed to enjoy it. Yes, you are.
Yeah. Yeah. You spend too much time there. So this kind of goes back to finding the right people, right? Because you want to find the person who is going to be excited and who does look forward to seeing who they can help that next day, or, how they can enjoy doing whatever their part is within the company. So during the interview process, when you do start onboarding, you've gotten your funnel, right? And you've got the little stem of the funnel, and you've gotten your, maybe 5 candidates or 10 candidates. Yeah, your short list of folks that you think have the potential of being a good fit for the company. What is the interviewing process like to be able to narrow that down even more to your final 2 candidates?
Yeah, great question. To the extent that you can, you want to involve, I'm going to say, as many people as possible in the interviewing process. And don't hear that to be, oh my gosh, I got to find 20 people. It could be 3. It could be 5. Just make sure it's not 1. And, the benefit of that is to go back to, your example of a smaller company. When we hire our very first person, our natural inclination is to hire somebody who looks and thinks and talks and believes and acts just like us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a huge mistake, as you already covered, because if you don't add somebody who will complement you, who will address your gaps and you can, will sort of balance out what you are not, then you've just added cost. You haven't added value, right? And so that's, really, really important. And it's the same with the perspective of who's hiring. So yes, your hiring manager should be involved. Someone with an HR, skill set should be involved. And I say it that way because the smaller companies typically don't have a dedicated HR person, right? They have somebody who came in because they needed someone to answer the phones, to keep the owner's schedule, and maybe act as the personnel department. So whoever that might be. So at a minimum, it's 2. You want at least 3 people involved. And I would say ideally somewhere between 5 and 8, depending on the size and the complexity of the company and the level of the role, right? Because you want to find a good enough diverse cross-section of perspectives. Google made sort of a masterclass out of this, and they had so many people, I believe they still do it this way, but have so many people who interview, the incoming hires, even people weigh in who may never interact with that person at all. Because to your point, by the time you get to that narrow stick toward the bottom of the funnel, those shortlisted candidates have met the minimum criteria for the essential functions of the job, right? So they've passed that first critical test. Now you want to establish if they are going to make a positive impact to your culture or a negative impact to your culture or a neutral impact, which in my mind, we have enough of that ambivalent, middle of the organization, right? So let's not add more of those people that are just sort of like
helping or hurting. They're just kind of there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Warm bodies.
So that's kind of tip 1 is to get, multiple interviewers involved toward that end stage to weigh in and give a perspective. And there are ways to do that you can sort of collect their input. You can have a standard evaluation form and things like that to take out some bias.
Going on that, when you have 5 people, 7 people, is this a group interview or do you want separate interviews with each one of those people?
It depends.
Okay.
I tend to go more toward a panel style if it's a higher level role. If it's an executive, certainly you want to have a panel interview. Because you tend to go over the same ground, right? And so what a group interview will allow you to do is when you're doing one-on-one, it's so hard to ask a question, really listen to the answer, write down some critical points from that answer and digest what they're saying and then react to it, right? And so, the group interview kind of eliminates that a little bit because it gives everybody some space to think very intentionally about another question, listen intently to what the answer is to that question, and then just sort of hear how others ask the question as well.
And you're not overlapping the same question where if you had separate ones, you might be asking the exact same question, so you're not really finding out as much.
That's right. And it doesn't stop at the executive level. I mean, I've done panel interviews when it's a position that's going to be very group facing. So, when I had to hire a head of training, for example, that's somebody who needs to be very comfortable going in front of a group, no matter what the combination is of the people in the room, right? Whether it's the board of directors or, the union shop down the street, you need to be comfortable in front of that diverse set of personalities. The more people you involve in the interviewing process, the more a group setting. Now, if you have 8 people involved, don't put all 8 in front of that poor candidate. Do a combination, right? A couple are going to be one-on-one, a couple are going to be group. But yeah, I mean, you really want to have as diverse of a cross section of perspectives as you can. One, to help you validate that ultimately that the candidate you decide on is the best fit within that culture and it's going to help you move the needle forward. And I just forgot totally what the second point of that was.
But if you have 8 people, so maybe you have 5 of those people on a panel, and then maybe the last 3 you're going to take them separately. Right. And is there a preference on who those 3 separate interviews should be with? Like, what roles in your company? Is there do you want your highest levels to be those individual interviews?
Again, it's going to depend. I know I'm really starting to sound like a consultant here who always just says it depends, but it really does depend on the role, the level of the role. I would say as a general rule that the direct hiring manager should participate twice, should do a one-on-one interview with the person and also participate in the group. Less so for that hiring manager to interview the candidate and more so to observe the interactions, the chemistry, the dynamic between that candidate and the cross-section you've assembled.
That makes sense.
And then the rest of them kind of depend. Sometimes you're going to have your HR person, your recruiter, do some one-on-one. If it's a really high-level position, maybe you're going to have the president or the head of that division, or some key internal customer do a one-on-one. So it really does depend on, what it is you're trying to find out. The other thing I would say, though, in terms of technique, I think most companies by now have heard of behavioral interviewing as as a preferred alternative to just sort of the standard, black and white answers or just closed-ended questions. And behavioral, kind of gives you an opportunity to say, describe for us a time when you had to resolve a conflict at work, right? That's kind of a standard example of a behavioral interviewing question. A best practice has become more of a situational interviewing style. And you want to blend these, right? It can't all be situational because then it starts to sound like you're defending some sort of thesis, for your PhD right. or something. But a situational might be, let me outline for you this, if it's a sales role, as an example, this is a deal that we've got on the table with a prospective client. How would you set up that deal? How would you position this to that prospect? Doesn't work with all roles. It certainly doesn't work at all levels, but situational questions properly placed will really give you an opportunity to see how they think on their feet, how they synthesize information, right? And honestly, if it's in person, which I know a lot of us don't have that luxury right now, but at least on video, it gives you an opportunity to study the body language, right? Because they're not going to have all the variables. A lot of this is going to be a sort of an academic question, but you can see how they react to that. I would be looking for in a situational question like that. Do they kind of lean in, figuratively speaking, to answer that question? Is this something that they go, oh, I love this one. This is awesome. Or do they go, oh my God, I hope I answer this the way that they're hoping, right? That tells you volumes because you want them to get excited by the challenge of that type of situation that you might put them in front of.
I love that because I've seen plenty of those questions and I never really thought of it in that sense. But and I like the example you gave though of giving them an actual real type situation that could happen within your company, or maybe is right. currently happening. Like you said, we have this kind of a deal on the table. How would you handle this? We have this customer service issue that happened. What would you have done in that situation? Because even if they don't know, are they able to think on their feet and adapt to that right. and give you an instant answer? Are they looking up to the left side and up in the air, trying to imagine right. something right. and create it? Or
searching for that, right?
Yeah, or looking down because they're remembering something that had happened to them previously directly, and they're using that as an example. So I think that's great.
And to me, I think it tells you a lot more, like we were saying before, past performance tends to be what we look at, as some sort of indicator of future results. And behavioral interviewing questions sort of became the standard to help us ferret that out. Situational interviewing, though, really helps us test, could they potentially be a good fit in the future for us, for our specific situations versus, that's how they handled it, or that's how they rehearsed that they demonstrated, right. This competency or that attribute. But let me give them a real world, sort of anonymized example of what we would face and how would they handle it.
That's perfect. So now that you've got them, you got the person that, you feel is just, man, they are, this is for us. This person's for us. I think it's a great fit for us. You go to them, they reciprocate that feeling. They feel like the company is going to be a great fit for them as well. The onboarding process. And I love onboarding processes because to me, it's everything. So what is the role of the onboarding process? How do you feel about it? And what are some good and bad things that that companies do with their onboarding?
Yeah. We're so simpatico, my friend, because I completely, agree with the value of onboarding. And to me, especially at higher levels, and like I said, I really specialize in preparing leaders and helping them accelerate their performance. Onboarding of new talent, new leaders is what I call the fattest pitch that most organizations completely miss, right? So when you say onboarding to a typical organization, they still equate that with the HR process of bringing people into our systems.
Paperwork.
Right? Right.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the more enlightened ones also understand that it means bringing them into our culture. But then they still mostly, overwhelming majority of companies and people fumble the rest because they say, okay, that first week, we've lined them up to talk to a couple of different people and we've shown them what their benefits are going to be and how to enroll. And we've, walked them around so they know where the restrooms are and they know where the fire exits are and they've met their team and, their direct manager maybe gave them, another copy of their job description and maybe even gave them some, first 90-day objectives. And then we go, job done. They're going to figure it out because obviously they're the right person because we put them through this grueling, process. And then we still, every hiring manager I know is still hoping for the plug and play candidate, meaning we put them through this rigorous hiring process. We validate that they're the right candidate. We plug them into the role and we leave them to it. And everybody gets that wrong because nobody really likes to interview. Nobody really likes to hire over and over and over again. So why do we make it so difficult, right? Well, we've really upgraded the way that we're interviewing and we've, integrated assessment tools, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way, and we can talk about that too, done right. And we've done all this stuff to front load getting the right candidate into the right seat. It doesn't mean that they know how to drive your car, right? Just because you put them through the ringer up front, and now all they hear is crickets from you because, well, you're a top talent and you're a great fit for our culture and you're going to figure it out. And so that's really, if I kind of really narrow down into my specialty, that's what I specialize in, especially at the leadership level, is to help that leader get far more prepared to, just crush it in that new role, in that specific company. And these are things that are not, quite honestly, they're not rocket science. But when you talk to your average HR organization and you give them all of these steps and you give them all of these tools, they say, yep, totally get why that would make sense. We just don't have the bandwidth for that, right? We're just not set up to do the kind of thing you're talking about. That's really the job of the hiring manager to sort of figure out. And meanwhile, the new leader is going, who? So I'll tell a quick example. So over the last couple of months, I've been having conversations. I've invited like over 300 heads of talent in large organizations and a little over 100 new leaders. So leaders who have been in their role for, 12 months or less, just to kind of get their experiences and to understand where the big disconnects are. And on average, it takes a new leader about 5.5 months, and this probably holds true for an individual contributor as well, but I was focusing on leaders. It takes them an average of 5.5 months to get fully competent and confident in that new role. Whether they are an internal promotion or they're coming in from the outside, it takes 5.5 months. And companies just sort of accept that. They go, well, obviously there's going to be a dip in productivity as they get up to speed. And it's this sort of duh moment that makes me scratch my head and go, why is that acceptable to you? Why would you build in and plan for and forecast a dip in productivity and therefore profitability for upwards of 6 months? Why not fix that time frame? And so what I specialize in is working with that leader and then ultimately working with a company so they can do this more systematically, so that ultimately they don't need me, to flatten that ramp from 6 months to 90 days.
So you're just building a plan to acclimate the person into their new role.
Yeah. Well, and working alongside of them,
Right.
it's sort of this, I've met very few HR folks who are actually who actually embrace their role as working alongside and hand in hand with the internal customers they serve. A lot of them prefer to be the behind the scenes. They do the process, they facilitate the paperwork, et cetera. And it's interesting. So in all of these conversations, so that was kind of a big disconnect. You mentioned ego, though, earlier on. You said, a lot of these new leaders, they kind of walk in with this ego and they kind of go up the ladder with a lot of ego. And what's fascinating to me is that was a general sentiment of just about every head of talent that I talked to. They said, these new leaders walk in with a lot of ego, a lot of bravado, a lot of confidence, and they're going to figure things out. And, to kind of support them, we've rolled out this new suite of online training, to help them ramp up their leadership effectiveness. You already know where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
So that highlighted for me two disconnects, because what the new leaders told me was, one, we don't have a lot of ego. We actually, and as individuals, unprompted, they said to me, those first 90 days, I was sitting there doubting that I deserved to be at this level. They weren't walking in with ego. They were walking in with fear. Big disconnect. The second one, though, was almost to a person. Those new leaders said to me, we don't need training. We need somebody to talk to about the situations we're navigating. Because even if it's not my first role as a leader, I've now been promoted or hired into a role that is new to me. And it might be a little bit beyond my depth. Maybe it's more complex. Maybe it's a bigger team. Maybe it's a difficult client, whatever it is. And they felt like they weren't getting that sounding board that they needed. It's great that HR rolled out this new learning management system and I have on-demand training that I can take whenever I might be able to find the time. I don't need that. I need somebody who's been there.
Support.
And that I can be completely vulnerable with to talk out these things and to figure out the right way forward. So those are the things that I specialize in, is to really help that new leader understand the landscape, understand who are the key stakeholders that could make or break my success and my team's success. Equip me with ways to have conversations with them early on, rather than as I think of it, as I find the time, right? And really build a plan to achieve the mission that I've been put in place to fulfill. And again, none of what I just said to you is rocket science.
Right. It's just,
it's
common sense, and people just need to take the time to do it. It's just giving the new person in that role the support that they need in a human way, giving them the human factor, not just the technology factor. Because yes, the technology is great. And as we go, and I've had other shows that we've discussed this before too, where, especially now in the Zoom age, I think it's going to be, we have our AC and BC, right? It's before COVID and after COVID, and life is not going to be different. And technology is going to play a bigger and bigger role as we go. I mean, that's just the way life is. But if we take away that human aspect of it, people are not going to feel important. They're not going to feel like they're part of the company. And then your culture dissolves as well because of that. Right. And that's going to lead me into my final question here, just because of time purposes. When you do get that onboarding done, and whatever your onboarding process is, good, bad, doesn't matter. But for the sake of example, the person ends up not being who you thought they were going to be for you. Not saying that it's the person's bad. It's just not a good fit, like you thought they would be throughout your interviewing process. How do you handle offboarding for those folks who just aren't going to be a good fit for the company?
It's such an important question because, especially keeping in mind that just about every new leader who walks into a role is walking in not with bravado, but with a lot of, do I even deserve this position? Am I even going to succeed? Right. And so you want to handle that relationship very, very carefully, whether they succeed or whether they don't. And unfortunately, the failure rate of new leaders is very high. Some put it at, upwards of 50% or even closer to 70% within 18 months. And a lot of what we're talking about, not just having a more rigorous, thoughtful hiring process, but implementing these sort of 90-day steps to onboarding, do a lot to mitigate that risk and to increase the probability of success. But it's not an absolute, right? Mm-hmm. Because we are dealing with human beings, and you can do all the rigor in the world to identify, to hire and to deploy and onboard support those leaders. But there's still going to be a percentage of them that just aren't the right fit, whether it's because the capacity we thought they had just isn't there, the capability isn't there, the mindset isn't there, or some other factors intervene that are beyond your control. I would say that the most effective and compassionate way to offboard anyone who ends up not being the right fit, whether it's an executive who have an alarmingly high failure rate, all the way down to an individual contributor, is having that, if you've done that sort of pre-work of really getting crystal clear on why that position is there to begin with and what it is in place to achieve, you're crystal clear with yourself as a company, as a direct manager, et cetera, and you have made that crystal clear in terms of expectations to the person you're bringing in, not just for that individual role, but to your earlier point, we don't want to just hire for a role, we want to hire for the culture. If you've done all you could to make those expectations crystal clear and provided some ongoing human contact so that they can check in along the way, you're both going to know when this becomes, a relationship that is just unmanageable. And so the separation, if you do it right and you ultimately have to go that way, becomes much more of a mutual decision. Does that work in every case? No. That's why we invented severance agreements, right? I mean, there's always that sort of, that fire exit if we need it. But the more thoughtful and the more intentional you are as a company or as a leader up front in determining, why you exist, why this role needs to be filled, what those X factors are, and stay in contact along the way, either yourself or through an intermediary like me, then if they still fail, you're going to know it sooner and you're going to be able to manage it more effectively and more compassionately.
Yeah, and if you're gauging it throughout the process, because when I was in middle management, firing somebody is one of the hardest things you have to do. When
Absolutely.
You're thinking about, they have families and, how would I feel, coming home to my wife and telling her I just lost my job, right? So you have that human, at least I hope you have that human aspect to it, but you also have a job. And so firing people is always one of the hardest things you have to do in middle management. And I learned that if you did your job right, you were coaching this person along the process. When they were making errors, you were coaching them, telling them why, it was an error, why it was not the right thing to do, and then giving them the alternative. Here's what you want to do in those situations, things like that. Throughout the way, you really, if they continue to do things down that road, they're kind of making the choice themselves, right? Because they know what the expectations are. They know they're not meeting them. You're not really firing them. They're kind of firing themselves because they're just not doing what they needed to do. And I don't like using the word fire in the situation you and I are talking about, because sometimes it's not really firing. You're letting them go. It just wasn't a good fit. It's not like they did something wrong. Right. They just weren't doing as many things right as you needed. That's right. So it is a touchy subject. And, sometimes like you have situations like here in Florida, it's a right to work state. And so they very rarely give you a reason why they let you go, because if you give them a reason, that just gives you ammunition for them to take you to court, right? So they'll just give you that generic, sorry, it just wasn't a good fit for us, and we're going to part ways kind of thing. But I like that you said that if you're doing everything right and giving them the backup that they need and the support that they need throughout the process, it should be a mutual decision. They should also feel like, you know what, I think you're right. I don't feel like I'm a good fit for this role at this time, kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously that's, it is easier said than done. Mm-hmm. It does take more time to manage performance the right way than it does to just sit back, watch them stumble, and then discipline them for it, and then ultimately exit them from the building. And what I always say to hiring managers is, you all tell me how much you hate interviewing candidates in the hiring process and having to fill vacancies. Why wouldn't you want to do everything in your power to make sure we hire the right person into the right role, into the right team, in the right way?
So you don't have to keep doing those interviews. So
it's not a revolving door, right? So it's like, and I always say that when there's a vacancy, I say, remember this feeling. of, either they quit without notice or you were, put in a position where you had to let them go. Remember this feeling because you hate it. So let's do even more of the work ahead of time to do this the right way, to try to drive down that risk. And listen, like I said, it's not an absolute. We're dealing with humans. If all we were managing were robots, this would be a much shorter conversation, right? But there are ways that you can increase the probability of success and decrease the probability of failure.
I like that. Claire, thank you so much. That's our time for today. Great info. This is the first show I've had on this subject, so I appreciate it. There's a lot of good information and everything else, and it actually hits because I can relate to a lot of those situations on both sides, being hired and going through the process, and also doing the hiring, the interviewing, the onboarding, and then, obviously the coaching and things like that. So it does hit very, very close to home. So a lot of those points that you made, I love a lot of those points and I can relate to them. So if you don't mind, take a minute or two here, let the listeners know how they can reach out to you to get more answers and maybe utilize the services that you have to offer.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you again for having me on your show. This has been a great conversation. So the fastest way to get a hold of me is to go to my website, which is clairechandler.net. You can also look for me on LinkedIn. And if you are an owner or a leader of a smaller business and you want some really quick steps and ideas for amping up the effectiveness of your business and the way that you lead it, you can go to profitableswagger.com and there's a diagnostic you can take there for free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. It was so much fun. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day-to-day to talk to us. Thanks,
Craig. Same here. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us this week. Go to our website at thebizreveal.com to catch all of our past episodes. We're available on all podcast apps, or you can watch any of our episodes on the Biz Reveal YouTube channel. I'm Craig Sawyer, and this is the Biz Reveal. Till next time.